world. I could feel all this death.
Jean, it was just a dream.
You wander through the willows in the forest you have found.
I've been called many things over many lifetimes.
Trying to hide.
Ra, Krishna, Yahweh.
Ever since the world found out about mutants, there have been secret societies who see them as some kind of second coming or sign of God. They believe that tens of thousands of years ago, an ancient being was born, the world's first
Mutant.
You are all my children. And you're lost. Because you follow blind leaders. But I am here now. I'm here for you.
Wherever this being was, he always had 4 followers he would imbue with power.
Like the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. You got that one from the Bible.
Or the Bible got it from him.
What is it?
Oh, God.
He can control all of us.
The world needs the X-Men.
That's why I'm here. To fight.
Not all of us can control our powers.
Then don't. This is war.
Everything they've built will fall! And from the ashes of their world, we'll build a better one!
I've never felt power like this before.
Hey YouTubers, it's Charlie. So we finally get to see an X-Men Apocalypse trailer, Survival of the Fittest, Battle Royale. So let's get going. So a lot of you may have read the Age of Apocalypse comic book. Marvel brought it back during Secret Wars. This isn't based on that. They didn't really adapt any specific storyline. Bryan Singer's a big comic book geek, so a lot of the things you see will just be familiar to the Age of Apocalypse comic book, but it's not going to be like an exact storyline. But we open on our brand new Jean Grey, Sophie Turner, flashing forward, seeing images of Apocalypse, all the destruction that he is going to wreak. I know the minute she was cast, everybody was wondering about a Dark Phoenix storyline sometime in the future. This is taking place in the 80s, so this is young Jean Grey, this is going to be young Nightcrawler, young Storm. They're transitioning to new versions of all these characters, so I definitely totally think they'll do some Dark Phoenix storyline with Sophie Turner sometime in the future. And yes, Bryan Singer did announce that he was coming back for the next X-Men film, so, whatever that ends up being, he will be part of it. If you didn't know this film takes place in the 80s, this Professor X hairdo will do it for you. And yes, obviously he's totally going bald in the film. But if Days of Future Past was a 70s X-Men film, think of this as an 80s X-Men film. And you can kind of see why they're not doing the exact Age of Apocalypse storyline, because that was kind of another darkest timeline story, and they just did that in Days of Future Past. So they want to do something that's a little bit different. So they're not going to be flashing forward, they're mostly going to be flashing back. Jean Grey flashing forward to death and destruction is about as close as we're going to get to future time travel. Then finally we get to see Mohawk Storm. I'm so excited about Mohawk Storm. Right now she is my favorite X-Men based on a character that we've already seen a bunch of times via Halle Berry. Hooded figure, obviously Apocalypse, going around seeking his 4 horsemen. Now Apocalypse showed up for the first time in X Factor number 5 back in 1986. But one of the really cool things about Apocalypse, just as a character, was that he was co-created by a female comic book creator. Almost every single comic book movie that has been made has been based on characters created by male creators. Louise Simonson was the female creator responsible for bringing him into the book. So they came up with the idea of Apocalypse, like the villain behind the villains. And right from that first appearance, his mantra was survival of the fittest, so it's been there since the very beginning. They didn't reveal that his name was En Saba Nur till Cable number 6. That was in 1993, so way later. It's a little bit like what they did with Ultron. Like whenever they first introduced the Ultron character, they didn't reveal his backstory till many issues later. He just showed up as this menacing villain, menacing the Avengers. So Apocalypse shows up in X Factor, scares the shit out of everybody, and then we learn his backstory much later. Most of you have probably seen the cartoon version from the 90s X-Men cartoon series. You should actually go back and rewatch that sometime this weekend. But he has a giant list of powers. Not sure if they're going to do every single one of them in the film, but it seems like they are, because they say he can control all of us. So it actually looks like he uses Professor X to speak to all the mutants on the planet to find them because he's trying to find his children. Working down the list though, he has molecular manipulation, that's how he makes himself grow, immortality, super strength, energy manipulation, a genius level mind, technopathy, meaning he can control electronic circuits, transmutation, and DNA manipulation. In case you haven't read the comics, he usually wears special armor. So he has this blue cast to him, he has normal skin, and then he puts this armor on later. If you remember the post-credits scene from Days of Future Past, he looks like that as a child when he's not wearing the armor, like until his powers fully activate. But if you want to read a really cool story with him more recently, there's a clone of Apocalypse that they've named Evan, who slowly learns about his heritage. Well, I'm like a copy of this really crazy villain that you guys have fought for a long time. During the Axis storyline, his powers are activated, so he goes from being this really good child to the crazy villain Apocalypse that we know and love, the survival of the fittest Apocalypse. The Axis comic leaves it in a really interesting way. He gets tied up with Deadpool's character. Speaking of which, there's a Deadpool trailer coming really soon, so keep your eyes peeled for that, but this is mostly about X-Men stuff. But if you're looking for a really fun twist on the Apocalypse character and you've already read Age of Apocalypse, then just read the lead up to X-Men Access. That storyline starts around Wolverine in the X-Men number 4 back in 2012, so it's relatively recent. Deadpool and Apocalypse just palling around town. Fictional character biography though, they call him the first mutant, but he was really born about 5,000 years ago. It sounds like it's longer than it actually was, because you have to remember that humans are not as old as the planet. Like, the planet is billions of years old. Humanity isn't that old. But because he was born looking deformed, nobody really understood what the X gene was 5,000 years ago. His people abandoned him. He was found by raiders, and they were the ones who instilled the idea of survival of the fittest in him as a child. So all this backstory is dealt with in Rise of Apocalypse. It's like its own mini-series, so you should definitely read that too if you want to learn about Apocalypse's backstory. But the big twist where he armors up, totally jumps himself forward, is where he runs into the spaceship from the future. Now the interesting thing is that it belonged to King the Conqueror, who had come back in time, but he finds it's disguised as the Sphinx, so I mean it's all based on Egyptian mythology. They find King the Conqueror inside the spaceship, getting ready to die, nurse him back to health. He becomes one of the pharaohs of Egypt. Now obviously we're getting into a little bit of Bible mythology, like if you're starting to recognize some of the symbolism, but you can think of Apocalypse in this storyline, the origin story, as the future King David character who supplants King Saul, eventually ends up bringing the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. And Apocalypse's spaceship is like the Ark. Now this is all comic books, so there are going to be a lot of changes to this. But essentially in his origin story, Apocalypse is the protagonist. So of course, King the Conqueror is the Saul character. The technology that Apocalypse gains access to was left by the Celestials. Now, if you remember the Celestials, they were briefly mentioned during Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy film. Think of them as all-powerful, cosmic, ancient beings that have been around since the dawn of time. But they debuted during Eternals #1, so if you want to read more about the Celestials, they're in that book. But Apocalypse's origin story is all about his coming-of-age tale and how his powers fully emerged in ancient Egypt. Really cool side note, I know a lot of people are hoping to see Mr. Sinister at a certain point. Apocalypse is responsible for transforming Nathaniel Essex into Mr. Sinister. They kind of deal with this in the trailer, in that Apocalypse is responsible for a lot of the big shifts in humanity. Like every once in a while in history, when he feels like he's needed, he'll wake up, proclaim survival of the fittest, wipe the slate clean, and rebuild with the mutants that are left in the ashes. So when Apocalypse comes into this film, it's not the first time that he's done this, and he's been successful every single time. Here's Havoc from the previous X-Men films. We've seen him before, but we also get to see the new version of Cyclops, his brother from the comics. Flashing back to ancient Egypt, telling a little bit about Apocalypse's origin story. Yay, Moira McTaggart's back though. I'm so happy that Rose Byrne is back. She's such an awesome actress, but her character just doesn't have a lot to do when it's open war in the streets with superpowers. Beast is back, and this is actually kind of funny. Jennifer Lawrence here as Mystique. This is actually going to be her last X-Men film. It looks like she might be an activist at this point, unless she's in like some sort of hippie prayer circle. I'm guessing she's become more proactive because of her role in this film. She seems like the super mutant that everyone rallies behind who do not drink Apocalypse's Kool-Aid. We get to see Nightcrawler, Cody Smith-McPhee, for the first time. Now in the comics, he's Mystique's son. I don't know if that's going to be the case in this film. Jubilee, huge character from the 90s animated series. In the comics, she was actually introduced to replace Shadowcat, or Kitty Pryde, however you want to think about her. Kitty Pryde had gone on to Excalibur, so they wanted a new character that kind of had that same energy. So they brought in Jubilee as like the kid on the team. Still has the hair, then Apocalypse and Mohawk Storm find Magneto. The premise of his character before the film, the setup is kind of funny. He's completely checked out. If you remember what happened at the end of Days of Future Past, he essentially got his ass handed to him publicly on television. So he has absolutely no idea what's going on with his life. Like, he's completely lost. So that's when Apocalypse shows up and says, hey, I totally have a plan. Why don't you follow my plan if you don't know what to do? So in the trailer, I know they're teasing new 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse, like Storm might be a Horseman of the Apocalypse, Angel might be one of the other Horsemen. They do have characters listed as like Death and Plague, but do not be surprised if Storm and Magneto become 2 of his Horsemen. Depending on which comic you're reading, there have been a bunch of different X-Men that have been Apocalypse's Horsemen at various points. And this is the new Angel, so he's in this universe now, so we'll probably see him in the next film too, if he makes it through this film, that is. I don't think they go through the trouble of all this character development just to kill him off in the first film, though. Finally, get our first shot of Olivia Munn as Psylocke. Most of the time, people who aren't super familiar with her character just remember that she's one of the few bisexual X-Men characters. So during Comic-Con, Olivia Munn was teasing a lot of people with that, just, I'm gonna be having a lot of fun in this movie. She even posted a bunch of pictures of her training with her swords. She uses twin swords. Now, there's a bit of a misdirect in the trailer because it makes it seem, based on this dialogue, that Professor X is going to be one of the Horsemen of the Apocalypse. But it just sounds like he gets co-opted by Apocalypse. When he says, I've never felt power like this, I think it's when he's seeking Apocalypse out, like when he hears about him for the first time and he starts looking. So he's not imbued with power, he's just sensing Apocalypse's power. Hey Charles, mind if we borrow your machine? We need to find some mutants. So obviously here, Mystique has put together this X-Men team. You can see Jean Grey and the new Cyclops in the background, and Quicksilver. Quicksilver is much bigger in this film. Evan Peters was like, oh yeah, I definitely get a lot of fun stuff to do. Much better shot of New Kids on the Block with Mama Bear Mystique. If you remember during the very first X-Men film, Wolverine is the fish out of water, makes fun of their costumes, and they have the joke, what would you prefer, yellow spandex? So there's always been Easter eggs to the classic costumes. These are just born out of the very hardcore idea that they are in open war, so they need to wear battle armor. We get to see Apocalypse make himself bigger, use his powers a little bit. This looks like it could be from Jean Grey's Flash Forward. And then finally we get bald Professor X. It looks like he's going to be going bald just as a result of the stress of the war with Apocalypse. Like most of the film, he'll have his 80s hairdo and then he will finally lose it by the end of the film. But make no mistake, there will be another X-Men film with these new characters, new Angel, new Jean Grey, new Cyclops taking the forefront. Bryan Singer will be directing that film too. I don't think that they've announced when it's going to drop, but just expect it in the next 2 years. And the Wolverine film will fall in between that. Like that will come in between this and the next X-Men film. That is going to be Hugh Jackman's last time as the Wolverine character. They haven't said whether or not he's going to appear in this movie. I'm expecting like a really small cameo, but he's probably not going to be a big part of the film. They kind of built Days of Future Past around his character, so you can understand why they don't want to do the exact same thing again. They want you to focus on these new characters. What about Deadpool though? He definitely exists in this X-Men universe, but because this is in the 80s, it sounds like they're going to make Deadpool a much more modern character. So he's probably still living as Wade Wilson when this movie picks up. Let me know in the comments, what is your favorite thing about this trailer? And what is your favorite Apocalypse storyline? Either from the cartoons or from the comics. And just as a bonus, Bryan Singer was on Twitter answering questions about the film earlier today, so I'm going to jam all of his answers here so you guys can hear it directly from the horse's mouth.
It's a much bigger film, deals with things on a global level, deals with the history of mutants, the ancient history of mutants, and it's our first trailer, and we'll have another one coming out probably next year, which will be even bigger. One of the most exciting parts about this movie is I get to reintroduce famous characters, Jean Grey, Nightcrawler, Storm, Scott, Summers, as younger people, as different characters, innocent characters who are just coming into the world of the X-Men. Well, it was very important for me to introduce Storm as a street urchin, a kind of innocent, sporting the mohawk from the comic. In this movie, I really wanted to take us to the comic book more than I've ever done before. The 80s are particularly exciting for me because these were my teenage years, and I was excited to explore them because I remember them so well, and they were so happy, and I wanted to bring horror and terror into the happiness of the 80s. Well, Olivia, clearly I'm most excited for everyone to meet Psylocke. She's an intense character, hot character, and designed very much like the comic book. I think you and I both had weighed on that, and I'm excited for that. Working with Jennifer is always awesome. She's a great girl and a fantastic actress, and her character really doesn't want to be a leader of any kind. She wants to work alone, but in this movie she finds herself in a reluctant leadership position, I should say. Alex, who's my favorite horseman? Well, clearly Storm. I mean, she rides lightning bolts down, man. Come on. Hey, Ben, I was looking at the emojis, and I found yours was a little misleading. He's so adorable and cute, like an angel, when in reality your character is like the most sinister evil one. McAvoy insisted on shaving off his own hair, so we actually have a video of me holding up my iPhone, FaceTiming Patrick Stewart watching McAvoy shave his own head. And Patrick was like, "Save some of that hair for me."
I will be doing a new Deadpool trailer video really soon. They might end up dropping one in the next week or so. I'm expecting one before the end of the year, so be sure to subscribe to get that. And if there's any X-Men bonus videos you guys want me to do, just let me know in the comments. Just in case you guys haven't seen it, I posted a new Star Wars trailer and a new Captain America Civil War teaser yesterday. You can click here for Captain America Civil War, and you can click here for Star Wars. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. Let's high five. I'll see you guys tonight.